What creepy place have you accidentally visited using Google Maps? Bamore here, Texas. Driving across the country with my girlfriend from NYC. Google Maps takes us off the main road, but I zoom out to double check and it looks like a good shortcut to get where we're going. The trail gets dustier, and suddenly we're at an open gate through which the road keeps going. I check the map again, and it looks okay, so we enter through. I figure, if the gate is wide open, we're probably safe. Passing a large barn, suddenly about 15 huge dogs come running after us. Real big dogs. Barking. Angry dogs. We keep driving as per Google's instructions, but the road suddenly ends and there's a creek that we could in no way cross to keep driving. So, we manage to turn around with these huge dogs surrounding us and slowly drive back the other way. Only when we get back to the gate this time, it's closed. In our rear view, we see a golf cart sputtering towards us. It's an old lady. We roll down the window. Not long before we hear "Y'all better get the heck out of here now." We try to tell her we're sorry and explain what happened, but she's not hearing it. "If y'all hurt one of my dogs, I'm gonna shoot you." My girlfriend is freaking out, but the gate is closed. So the old lady pretty hilariously has to explain to us that it will open automatically if we approach it closer. It'll open automatically if you just pull up, so we drive up and it starts to open. But we're too close to it and awkwardly back up to let it open all the way before hightailing the F out of there. Never taking the shortcut in the middle of nowhere ever again. I actually submitted a report to Google about this and never heard back from them. The NSA. It wasn't so much visiting it as trying to get somewhere completely else, and the GPS refusing to recognize that the facility was even there, thus refusing to go around it. And NBSP. The road it wanted you to take just stuck on the lane that goes to their gate, without a real way to turn off. So you get there and the security guy is like, "Badge? Oh, sorry, I don't work here. I just got turned around. I am not supposed to be here." "Okay, then. You'll just have to turn around and go that way." "Yeah, can I just turn around here and drive back out the gate?" "You can pull over right here and that security car will escort you back the gate." Cue black flashy lights are full of cop type guys. I once applied for a job at a tanning salon at the next town over. The online ad made it seem really chill and like it would work well with my school hours. They were specifically looking for high school or college girls, so that fit the bill. Plus free tanning or whatever. I sent in my resume and they emailed for me to come to a job interview. When I followed Google Maps to the address, there aren't any street views of it. It was a dilapidated looking old house. A scraggly looking guy opened the door and waved for me to come in. I noped out of there really fast. I'm not sure if this story counts. Cementland in St. Louis, an artist known for creating the town's renowned city museum, basically an adult jungle gym in an old downtown office building, tried to outdo himself by turning an abandoned cement factory into the same thing. He did a lot of it himself and died when his bulldozer flipped over. The site now has these creepy carnival style painted concrete domes along the street and giant abandoned machinery behind them. The city museum is one of the coolest places I have ever been. I think my creepiest detour was when I accidentally stumbled across this really odd mansion-like building that had spiked fences all around with trees encompassing the entire thing. It gave me the impression of it being something like a concentration camp. Just a few large buildings with a single house in some non-popular area of Southern California. About 2 years later I find out the Church of Scientology has a private prison in Southern California and I skimmed its entrance. The Church of Scientology has a private prison. Sorry, what? This doesn't honestly surprise me too much, but still, what? Okay, so this happened during our trip to Goa, India. It was our second day and we were on our way to the hotel we had booked for that day, which happened to be on the other side of Goa. So most of the 2-hour trip, as estimated by Google Maps, was on the highway, which was pretty cool, but when we were like 20 minutes away Google asked us to take a diversion from the highway as it was a shorter path. The road became much smaller and in some time we went through a huge gate. We couldn't read what was written as it was too dark and TBH at that time we weren't even bothered. This is where the problem started. The road started becoming worse and worse and soon it was like those roads you see in safaris. About this point we also lost network coverage. We were getting a little anxious by now. Just then we saw a sign which said please refrain from feeding the wild animals. This is when we stopped our scooters to check where we actually were. So apparently Google had taken us on a shortcut which went through a wildlife reserve, don't remember the name. We were freaked out, but the map said we had only like 10 minutes of travel time before we got put off the reserve, so we went on. But in that road and with our scooters, the progress was very low. Then we saw another sign which said beware of leopards. This is when we all actually lost it. We knew we had to get out, so we stuck close to each other, freaking out at every sound we heard. And after a good 30 minutes we were finally out. Cannot tell you how relieved we were. We learned to never blindly listen to Google Maps again. This is one of those stories where the very common rule of every problem is magnified when riding a scooter applies. El Bronx in Bogota, Colombia. I remember reading that it was raided last year and found torture chambers that were known as chop houses and used to dismember human bodies. I was going to a nature preserve to go hiking for a bit. I plugged in the address, and instead of taking me to the nature preserve itself, I was taken to a worn down looking shack a few blocks away from the nature preserve, where I parked in bewilderment. And I mean, this thing looked like it was barely holding itself up. No animals, no farmland, no cars around, just a creepy looking shack at the end of a dirt path. Next thing I knew, this guy who looked to be in his early to mid 50s walks out of the shack with a shotgun aimed right at me while I'm still in the car, screaming at me to get the heck off his property. He didn't even finish shouting at me before I hit reverse and noped the frick away. I eventually found the preserve and went hiking, but that's the closest I've come to getting shot. I found it years ago and haven't been able to find it since. I was scrolling around the Amazon, deep near the middle of South America, following rivers and just seeing what I could see. Far away from civilization, I found this house. One single house. It was on the edge of a river and the house had a square yard, not much bigger than the house, cut out from around the bush. It looked well kept and had a dock and boat, which seemed like the only way to get access to other people. I remember being in awe at how different their life must be and how stepping out into their yard only to be surrounded by miles and miles of dense jungle. It was the most terrifying thing I can think of. Brazilian here. I've been to the Amazon and that's normal. A lot of farming families etc. live out there in houses at the river and go everywhere by boat. My mother was trying to find a school for me. We toured one of them and it turned out to be a Scientology school. Or at least run by Scientologists. It was creepy. There's a woman who works for the Church of Scientology and her job is to read any mention of Scientology on Reddit. Everyone, say hi to Karen. Not Google Maps but the GeoGuessr site that uses it. Found myself in Mexico. Tried to find some road signs by going down a road. Found patches of red liquid instead. Then a lot of red liquid. Saved some screenshots and ran the frick away. No idea what I'd found, but it didn't look very wholesome. GeoGuessr is awesome. I once found myself in some genuine godforsaken crap hole in the middle of the Asian bit of Russia, which was about 500 miles or something from the nearest town. It was just a semicircle of tin huts in the steppe. Coincidentally, my best hit was also in Russia, where I just by luck guessed somewhere 8 miles from a place near Moscow. Once I was on holiday on Singapore with my mother. On one day we decided to check out a nearby place where the movie park is located at, on which we haven't had much information on. Usually my mother plans everything as careful as possible with plenty of maps and information from tour guides and the hotel people. Anyways, we're having a good time enjoying nature and stuff and noticed a little side road leading to a small cave. My mother took a bunch of pictures and we kept going. Eventually we didn't quite know where we were, so I pulled out the phone the hotel had given us on our rooms, which had internet and therefore Google Maps. I navigated us around, but we weren't really getting to where we wanted to. Suddenly we noticed a man in a construction worker uniform whom we decided to follow since he looked like he knew what he was doing. We followed him about 10 meters behind until we're in a rather dark area surrounded by trees which looked like a dead end. The man stops at the wall, pulls out his wiener and pees against the wall. My mom and I then realized we'd been following this poor guy to his peeing spot instead of somewhere where we could find a bus stop or anything. We were somewhere near Pensacola, Florida on vacation trying to find our vacation house. Our GPS took us off-road to some weird road towards a military base. That was fun trying to explain to the guard who regulates who goes in and out. He redirected us towards Niceville where the house was. I once was cruising along Arizona or California on Google Maps, satellite mode, and had gone way off the beaten path. Like, it was only desert, for miles, and the only road I had seen was a dried up stream bed. Then suddenly I came across this bizarre carving in the ground. It was huge. I can best describe it as a circle, with increasing, smaller circles inside. It had a small metal building next to it and that was it. No roads, no houses, no cars, just a circle. I thought it might have been a farm, but if it was, it's the most nonsensical farm ever. All that space, and you made a perfect circle, in the desert, where it's hard to grow things, miles away from any road, and no water. If anyone can explain, I would appreciate it. Bombing site. That's a target. Went to a hospital in Vegas. Maps had me drive through an area I found out later is called Alphabet City. One street dead-ended and there was a tent city on the sidewalk full of homeless people. Under a bridge was the main meeting place with like 20 people. It is considered one of the highest crime and drug areas in the city. Leaving the freeway on-ramp was a block away in the opposite direction, so I could have avoided it entirely. I've lived in Las Vegas my entire life and have never heard of Alphabet City. Don't know how creepy this is, but it loosely fits the criteria. I was living in Eastern NC and went to meet a friend who was getting a ride halfway to me. We figured we'd just find the halfway point on Google Maps and then find a gas station or store or something and then meet there. Google Maps found us Watha, North Carolina. So he arrives first and calls and tells me he can't find any gas stations or stores. So he pulled into the first non-house, the Watha Baptist Church, and I say okay and punch it into the GPS. It's only about 10 minutes from where I am now. Cool. I get there and it's a very small church in the middle of the boonies, and it's also about 11 PM at this point. There's no one in the parking lot, so I'll look at the sign out front and double check. Yep, definitely the Watha Baptist Church. I call my friend and ask where he's at, and tell him I'm here at the WBC. He says that can't be right because they are looking at the entrance to the parking lot and that they're the only one there. At this point we come to the conclusion that there must be two WBC, and I tell him to stay where he's at with his lights on and that I'll find out where he's at. I mean, how many Watha Baptist churches could there be in a small town that didn't even have its own store? The answer is 3. Eventually I found my friend. He was at the Watha Baptist Church right off of Whodunit Saint. Definitely an interesting evening. Wasn't there 2 places that looked like someone was dragging a dead body into a lake? I remember watching some YouTube video about it. I think I know what you're talking about. People actually found out that there was no body, and it was, in fact, a wet dog. The water from the dog made the wood look red-brown, so it kinda looked like blood, and the weird body-like thing was the dog. Again, I'm not 100% sure this is the same thing. I was driving home from my friend's house that was 2 hours away in Michigan. It was roughly 1 AM and at some point on my drive home, my phone switched from car to bicycle mode. I turned unknowingly down a muddy off-roading trail, and about halfway down the trail there was a single pool ladder in the middle of the trail with no houses around. I drove through the bushes next to the trail because I was not getting out of my car to move it. Luckily my car was 4-wheel drive and I was able to get through without being stuck because I lost all cell phone signal and had to just keep following the trail. Eventually I found an actual road and stopped listening to my GPS because it wanted me to take another trail. About 45 minutes later I figured out what was happening when it wanted me to take a bike trail instead of the road right next to it. It was absolutely terrifying at the time, but now it's a great story to tell. Never touch stairs in the woods. I have an hour-long commute to work. The traffic was ridiculous on the highway coming home one day, so I whipped out Google Maps to see if there was a better way to get home. It has me get off the next exit and drive through a few towns before getting back on the highway. It was dark out and I was unfamiliar with the area, so I'm not sure if Google meant to send me this way or not, but at some point I ended up getting on a sorry road that ran through the woods. I drive through this heavily wooded area for maybe 10 minutes, thinking all the while that I was going to hit some kind of roadblock and that's when the mountain clan of inbreds was going to attack and eat me. Instead, when I came out of the woods and back onto a paved road, I found myself in a town that was made of the really big, nice houses. Not unrealistically big, but definitely upper middle class big, all lit with street lamps. It was so surreal. I felt like I was in a Studio Ghibli movie or something. And honestly, part of me was worried I'd come out in a gated community and was going to get the cops called on me. Eventually I got back to the highway and made my way home. I've driven through that town quite a few times since then to avoid the highway, but I've never found that dirt road again, nor that section of town. I don't have any illusions that something supernatural had happened. I suck with directions anyway, and it takes a long time for an area to become familiar to me, but I'll always remember it as a really strange experience. I'm into true crime and was watching a documentary about a child who murdered someone. I googled the child's name, who has since been released from prison as an adult and was subsequently placed on a violent offenders list that published his address. I looked up the address on Google Street View and found the house. The image was captured around the time of the murder, his parents' house, and there are cop cars outside of the house. I'm not sure if it has to do with what occurred, but it was certainly eerie. And yes, I'm weird for looking it up, but whatever. I live for creepy crap. One time I was playing around on Google Maps, showing my boyfriend at the time where I was hoping to live when I got my teaching position in Japan, and I realized you could drop the little navigation guy into some buildings. Thought it was awesome and tried going into a temple. Well, it threw me into something next to it. I was like, wow, this must be a shop. There's a lot of really intensely orange cabinets. Then I saw pictures of dogs on the shelves and vases. Oh, this is a pet cemetery. I don't remember exactly where it was though at this point. I just know it was somewhere in Kanazawa. I didn't even know you could drop that guy into buildings. Some street in Elizabethtown. Normal street, cute houses. Beautiful trees. Then there's this one house, distinctly different in style, or rather in its lack of it. Some dirty grey blinds, with gapes in them on eye level. No garden or trees to speak of, grey walls. The house across the street from it has curtains closed shut on all windows. In New Orleans, put in Frenchman Street on Uber. Thought it was strange we were getting in the highway, and even stranger when we pulled up in an abandoned industrial park. Fortunately the Uber driver was understanding and took us to the right spot, even though he was probably a little freaked out when we were hysterically recounting how just a few minutes prior my friend tried to get in a car that he mistakenly thought was the Uber and the driver peeled off through a red light. Good night. Over by Area 51, there was this part of the ground that was blood red. If you zoomed closer, there was a small lot around the center of it. I noped out of that area extremely quickly. This sort of fits the prompt, so in traditional AskReddit style I'll still tell you the story of the fog. One day back in college I wanted to smoke some weed, and told my then roommate that rather than go to our usual spot, I wanted to go on an adventure. So we looked around on Google Maps for somewhere which looked secluded, and found a spot off a road in the boonies. Turns out, that road was actually pretty busy, and me being paranoid I decided we needed to go somewhere less busy. Since we had phones with GPS, we decided we could just drive around randomly until we found somewhere good, light up, and GPS our way back. So we found a closed gas station. It was like 1 AM at this point, out in the country, and drove out behind it, and lit up. So we're waiting for a little while to come down a bit before driving back, and we start hearing this noise off in the distance. It sounds like a small motorbike, or a chainsaw. It starts getting closer, then speeds up until it sounds like it must be within 50 yards, then just cuts out. Frick whatever that is, so we get in the car and drive off. Around 3 minutes later my roommate decides he's too high to keep driving, so we pull off the road. At that point, we realize part of the problem is that we drove into some fog so thick we could barely see 10 feet in front of us. Having avoided the danger, we decide to wait out the fog of the mind, or the fog of the earth, whichever left first. The fog is very eerie. We're seeing faint lights come on the horizon and slowly grow in intensity for what felt like minutes until finally a car would pass by. Being high and paranoid augmented this eerie feeling, of course. We sit here for probably a half hour, and we start hearing the noise again, in the distance, slowly getting closer and closer, until it sounds like it's right outside our car. Then it cuts out, so we've obviously been followed by some serial killer, and we accept our demise at this point. But, It never comes, and we never see anything. After about 15 minutes, we feel ready to go again. So we leave, and make it home unscathed. We never did find out what the noise was. Somebody driving past on a crappy motorbike which 2-piece stoner wankers freaked the frick off about. I think you'll find my explanation slightly more plausible. Not necessarily creepy but weird and eerie. North Korea. They paint the ground to make it seem like it has huge parks and water parks, but if you zoom in it's all just painted cement. And the houses. Terrible. The instructions made me turn at every corner, alternating between right and left. After some time, when turning left on a street I had used a few times before, I entered a tunnel that hadn't previously been there. If you plug in the coordinates to Area 51, there's a large kind of whited out area that looks like they're hiding it under some bad paint skills. 37 degrees 1406 N 115 degrees 4840 W. If you hover the yellow man over it he turns into a spaceship lol. Google Maps glitched once and took me to an empty cornfield in the middle of nowhere with a sign stapled to a fence post. The words, "Trespassers shot on sight" were hand painted on it. The spelling there is correct. Absolutely terrified. I turned around and called me mom for directions. Crap, can't believe I actually have something to tell. So, my partner and I have been visiting Kiev in autumn of 2015 and we picked up a cat from the street. So we moved to a different room, one that allowed cats. The owner had a dog. I asked him if he knew any good vet clinics and he recommended one nearby. We were visiting it semi-regularly. With the cat we went per public transport, but to pick up some stuff we went by feet, because it's just cheaper. Also, to note, it was in a pretty central area of Kiev, definitely not the outskirts. So the first time we were going back from the clinic I whipped out my phone and we just lazily followed the blue line. The whole area was built a little bit like the blocks in NYC and in many other places on Earth. Straight streets with intersections spaced out somewhat evenly. Imagine my surprise when I started to turn into one of the intersections, led by the always trusty Mr. Google Maps, and saw a huge f***ing sign that said to beware of the increased radiation. We were about to walk into the territory of a nuclear reactor. It wasn't creepy, but I did try to detour through Stennis Space Center while on the way to Florida. GPS told me it was a sweet shortcut. NASA was not as enthusiastic. I'm from New England, but was traveling for work in the South. I was heading back to my hotel in NC coming back from a small town in SE. I forget the name. This was before nav was popular and I would rely on maps to get around. At some point I made a wrong turn and was lost on some back roads in the middle of nowhere that weren't on the map. I started noticing how old and run down all of the houses and shacks were. Some places even had outhouses in their yards. Very southern backwoods stuff. I went down a dead end and turned around in the entrance of a trailer park. There were at least 20 methed out MFers staring at me like I was an alien. Here I am, a Yankee in a dress shirt and tie, driving a brand new rental in the middle of Bumfuck, Carolina. As I start to pull away they all start chasing me and throwing crap at my car. I took butt out of there, afraid they would pursue me in one of their vehicles. Fortunately they didn't and I eventually found my way back to the highway. That was a bit of a culture shock for me. We have some hillbillies and rural poor areas in New England, but nothing like the South. Probably thought you were the tax man lol. Exit 421A on I-70 in Kansas City. Google said you take it to turn around from westbound to eastbound I-70. It's a 12-foot wide train tunnel under the highway, leading to the train yard. The whole time I was driving through it, I thought a train would start coming at me at any moment. During my trip to Australia, I drove around the Atherton Tablelands. It was a relaxing drive for the most part and I got to enjoy the Australian countryside. I wanted to visit one of the sites on my bucket list, but Google Maps kept redirecting me to some secluded back way. I must have followed it for at least 40 minutes and before I knew it I was far from civilization. Paved roads turned to gravel roads turned to dirt roads. As I was driving along, I remembered how isolating and eerily quiet the surroundings were. I thought if something were to happen to me, no one would know where I was. Needless to say I was creeped out and my gut was telling me something bad might happen. Eventually I come across a sign that said beware, do not enter. That was enough for me to make a U-turn and hightail it out of there. I got a full zoom in and browsed the Pacific Ocean out of boredom. Later on, I found some land, then realized it's an island, and Google Maps showed me many nameless streets and I could clearly see the houses. I tried Street View, not expecting it to work, but it did. A nice tropical island. Then I look up to left upper corner where the button to exit Street View is and see the following name: Pitcairn Island. Let's just say I was surprised that I have accidentally found a needle in a haystack. Remember searching around a Nintendo building on Google Maps Street View, and when I was going down a road I looked up in the sky and saw some type of floating thing. Looked like a flying saucer. No way it was a plane. Oh god, Murder Town. Freaking Murder Town. Wasn't the name of the place. I don't even know which state it was in exactly. My friends and I drove up from San Diego to Joseph, Oregon for the eclipse last year. A 20-hour road trip there and back for anyone curious. It was a weird route as well. Calton, Nevada to Oregon to Idaho and back into Oregon. Anyways, we were driving back and it was close to 1 in the morning and I don't remember if we were in Oregon, Idaho, or Nevada. It all just looked like black hills. We needed gas soon and so I looked on Google Maps and it said there was a truck stop with gas and a diner about 20 minutes away. That would have put us at 1/4 tank by the time we got there, and it was on the same highway we were already on, so we figured it was a good spot. There was no town leading up to this place for miles at all. It was just in the middle of bumfrick nowhere. Red flag number 1. We pull in and it's set up with a diner in front and some motel rooms for truckers in a semicircle behind it. At first glance, it seemed like there were no lights on anywhere but the one street light. Red flag number 2. We pull in and figure we'll skip food if they're closed and just get gas. The gas pump is one of those 1960s gas pumps, the big square white ones where there aren't any slots for money and you 100% need an attendant. Red flag number 3. By this point we are obviously kind of spooked. Looking around more closely, we notice that there seems to be a small TV on in one of the motels but no other light in that room, and some kind of light in one of the back rooms of the diner. My brother, being the biggest one of us, decides to see if there's someone who can help. He looked right at us and said without a seriousness, "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, drive off without me," and walks off toward the diner. At this point my friend and I noticed that the only semi-truck parked in the lot, it was fairly close to our car, was running, with no one in it, and it was not a big enough cab to have a bed in the back, just the 2 front seats. Red flag number 4. Thankfully my brother was running back to us and hopped in the car. He had found no signs of people actually being around and this was already starting to feel like a horror movie. We noped the frick out so hard. We stopped at the next gas station. This one well lit and with a 24-hour convenience store and a teenage clerk. We almost ran out of gas getting there, but we weren't murdered and eaten. So got a look at the bright side. TLDR. Google Maps led us to a dark and significantly creepy truck stop gas station in the middle of nowhere that was straight out of every horror movie ever. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.